This is Dylan Lawrence Moore with the Volitional Science Network. I wrote an article recently titled Welcome to Tweakerville, where I documented some of my experiences cleaning up after drug addicts, and addressed growing concerns over the drug epidemic that is sweeping across the United States. Particularly, I focused on my local area, not just because I'm working in it, but because I live near the city of Everett, Washington, which has received nationwide media coverage for being Tweakerville. For several years, in the community where I grew up and in the surrounding communities, there has been a growing transient and homeless problem, and the issue is getting to be on the tip of everyone's tongue. I wrote this article because I wanted to show people what I was seeing in my business. I never realized how bad the drug situation was until I saw the destruction tweakers leave in their wake, and I felt others would appreciate knowing what was going on in their backyards. I also went into the small amount I knew about methadone clinics, that drug addicts are able to stay addicted on drugs for years from what they're able to get just from treatment centers. Obviously, this doesn't apply to all treatment centers, but if it's even a fraction of them, the glaring point still stands. Having the treatment centers aid in continuing addictions is ludicrous. It destroys the addicts and it distracts others into thinking that something is actually being done to help these people, when in reality the treatment centers are making things worse. If anything is to be done about correcting this drug problem, people obviously need to be aware of what's going on in the treatment centers. To my surprise, the article went viral. Most of the feedback was positive and grateful. People really are fed up with the tweaker situation and they want something done about it. However, I did get some negative feedback, and the most of it centered around one thing: that I said drug addicts are responsible for taking drugs. I guess in the world of an addict, it is forbidden to suggest that they are responsible for their own actions. In the midst of these reactions, there was a person who read my article who reached out to me by the name of JP. She is an ex-heroin addict, and she backed up everything that I wrote in the article, adding that in many cases it was much worse than what I described. I felt this was an excellent opportunity to explore the topic further, so I asked her to come onto the show for an interview. She agreed, and during the conversation we went over many topics, but we largely focused on the 12-step program that is commonly used in rehabilitation centers. As JP described her personal experience, to my horror, I discovered that the 12-step program completely removes responsibility and agency from the addict. It teaches the addict that they are not responsible for their actions, and that it is impossible for them to recover from their addiction. How can it be any surprise that the addicts aren't considered responsible for their actions when this is the first thing they learn when they go through recovery? I feel like I've gone down the rabbit hole in exploring this topic. Every aspect of what is supposed to help people recover from their addictions appears to reinforce the opposite. So what needs to be done? The first step is understanding the problem. I hope this conversation can serve as that first step. Here is Welcome to Tweakerville Part 2. Interview with an ex-junkie. Well, thanks for coming on, JP.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you reached out to me after reading my article, Welcome to Tweakerville, which I kind of wrote as an offshoot from the other stuff that I'm doing, and I got a huge response from it. I wasn't prepared for that. And you connected with a lot of stuff I wrote in there, and you told me that you had some stuff to add, which is great because when it comes to this drug situation, I'm a guy on the outside looking in. I'm not even dealing with these people directly. I'm just cleaning up after them after they've been kicked out of wherever they've been kicked out of. And I wanted to give you the platform to talk about your experience actually being the junkie, recovering, and seeing how people do or don't recover.
Yeah, I mean, I've basically been in recovery kind of on and off for the past, I want to say about a year and a half. I mean, I first made the decision to go into treatment in September of 2016. And from treatment, I went to a halfway house for a little while. Then I moved back in with my parents in April, and then relapsed pretty quickly. And then in June, I went back into treatment, and now I'm living in another halfway house. And I have no plans on moving back in with my parents because that just seems to cause me to relapse.
Didn't work last time.
No, I've come to associate living with my parents with, using drugs.
Wow.
And they understand that too. And, they're not like offended by it or anything. They understand that I need to, fly the nest, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Can you, or would you be willing to tell your story of how you became an addict in the first place?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess it all started when I was like in high school, and I started smoking pot when I was 15. And throughout college, I was a pretty heavy pot smoker, and drank a little bit, but no more than most people drink. And when I was 25, I was in a car accident, and my car was totaled, although I pretty much walked away with only some surface burns on my wrists from the airbag deploying. But the doctor at the emergency room seemed to think that that was enough for me to require a prescription for Vicodin, which even had a refill on it. And I took the Vicodin just as prescribed. Well, actually, so I took the Vicodin as prescribed, but that night my mother, who I guess I didn't tell her that I had been prescribed Vicodin, or maybe she just didn't hear me when I said it.
This is the same night that you took it home in the first place? Okay.
Yeah. So I'd already taken 10 milligrams of Vicodin as prescribed. And my mother gave me half of one of her Klonopins. I don't know if you're familiar with Klonopin.
I am not familiar with a Klonopin. Is that an opiate?
It's a benzodiazepine. It's in the same family as Valium and Xanax.
Okay.
So, but the thing about benzodiazepines is that if you combine them with opioids, it enhances the effect greatly.
Uh-oh.
So I took that, and I did not know that at the time. Otherwise, I wouldn't have taken it.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I wouldn't have known at all.
So, yeah. So, between the 10 milligrams of Vicodin, the half a milligram of Klonopin, I'm like, so I take the Klonopin, go upstairs to play video games to, sort of decompress. And I'm like dropping my Xbox controller like every, 30 seconds and laughing my ass off, thinking, oh my God, this is so funny.
Did you realize what was going on at that point? That you were just high off your ass?
I realized that I was pretty pretty far gone, and I liked it. And so I kind of did the same thing the next night. That's the thing. I would only take the Vicodin, before bed, even though the prescription said like every 4 hours or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would just take it before bed, and then I'd also smoke a ton of weed as well. So I mean, it's like that wasn't even enough. Like I was already really going overboard.
And so would you say that this initial thing that got you started, and I'm not necessarily talking about the weed, I'm talking about the accident of taking both of these drugs at the same time, was it actually an accident?
Well, yeah, because I my mother had handed me the half a Klonopin to sort of to settle my nerves, because obviously I was upset that my car was gone. Neither of us, well, I don't know if my mother knew the effect that benzodiazepines have on opiates, but like I said, she didn't realize that I had taken Vicodin, that I'd even been prescribed it in the first place.
And you didn't think to mention it?
No.
Or did you want the drug?
Well,
a little of both.
Yeah, I kind of wanted something that would settle my nerves, because at that point the Vicodin wasn't really taking effect. It was, I'd swallowed the Vicodin, so that takes a while for it to take effect.
Mm-hmm.
you know, and
And,
then when I went upstairs to play like Elder Scrolls or whatever it was I was playing, it just like hit me all at once.
and you used the term "not enough" with the Vicodin, the I forgot the name of it. What is it?
Clonopin.
Clonopin. And then you had to smoke a bunch of weed on top of it, and you said it wasn't enough. Now, in the article I wrote, near the end, I talked about how what I've learned listening from Stefan Molyneux going over how addictions actually work is that people who are prone to addictions actually have problems controlling their own neurotransmitters.
Yeah, we've
Now,
got the problem with self-soothing and everything. Yeah, I've also checked out his Bomb in the Brain presentation, and I thought
now,
it was pretty damn accurate.
pretty damn accurate for what you experienced.
Yes. You know, like I was a daycare baby, for example. You know, so I had
Mm-hmm.
all that separation and,
Abandonment.
yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, I spent maybe about a total of, you know, 15 hours a week with my parents on Mondays through Fridays, you know, compared to the, you know, 8 or more hours spent in school and daycare.
Right. And then I've heard Steph point out the statistics, which is if a child's separated, it only takes 20 hours a week to have
40 hours for me.
yeah, well, and the 20 hours the child exhibits the exact same responses as if you had completely abandoned it.
Yeah, as if I was an orphan.
Yes. So you we got to the story of when you started taking it. What happened after there? When did it get to the point where you're like, wow, I am addicted to this stuff?
Well, that's the thing, actually. I guess because I took it as prescribed for the most part, and actually, like I said, I was only taking it once a day as opposed to like the every 4 hours as prescribed. I didn't really come away with any kind of withdrawal. I mean, maybe I did, but maybe I just passed it off as a cold,
Uh-huh.
you know. But the point was, you know, after the Vicodin was all gone, I was bummed for sure, but it was not, I wasn't ill or anything like that, and didn't really think about it for a while. But then when I was at work, there was this girl I used to work with who was about my age, and when I had the Vicodin, I actually ended up selling her some of it. So she knew that I had like taken opiates before. So
Mm-hmm.
what she ended up getting her hands on some generic oxycodone,
Mm-hmm.
and she actually like gave me a 30 milligram pill,
Mm-hmm.
which she even like cut in half for me, and I took like I took the first half after I got home from work because I was worried that
You might not be able to work.
yeah, exactly, so I was at least responsible that way. But when I got when I got home, I took the 50 milligram half of the pill, and swallowed it and everything. And like a few minutes later, that's actually the first high that I really remember.
And is
Where
15 milligrams like a normal, like what, is that a lot or not?
it's it
It's a
wouldn't
good
kill
dose.
anybody. Yeah, I mean it's a good dose for somebody that's relatively new
Got it.
to
Okay.
taking them. Like I said, it would never kill anybody. Um, And I remember like one of my old high school friends called me, and I hadn't talked to him in a while. And I pick up the phone, I'm like, "Oh my God, Mike, you called me. I'm so happy." I was like ridiculously social and happy and, affectionate and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that just really stood out for me. And that night I took the other half. I think that night I actually snorted the other half,
Whoa.
and was very sorry that I did because my nose was just like burning for quite a while.
Why did you
But I
snort
also,
it?
well, that's what people do to get high. They'll
But I
snort
mean,
pills.
I understand, like, once you develop a resistance to it, but it was just your second shot, right?
Sheer curiosity.
Okay.
I just wanted to see if it was gonna like be more intense.
Wow. So
Yeah,
at some point here, you moved on to injecting heroin, right?
right. That still took a few years. I did not inject heroin for the first time until I was 30.
So
I remember at
can you
this
give
point I'm
us
still
the
25.
can you connect the dots for us between 25 and 30?
Okay, so and once again, after the oxycodone was gone, I didn't really think too much of it. Although there was one time I got my hands on some cough syrup that had hydrocodone in it. I guess my father had been prescribed some cough syrup that had basically Vicodin in it. And
Mm-hmm.
the minute I realized that, I actually went to the drugstore, bought some cherry flavored cough syrup, which tasted very similar to what my father had been prescribed. I switched out the bottles.
Uh-huh.
Well, I switched out the medicine.
Right.
So I basically gave my father a placebo, and then just drank that. So basically, anytime I had the chance to use an opiate, I was
Right.
all
So,
over it.
I mean, at this point that you describe with your father's cough medicine, you're already stealing for drugs,
Yes.
essentially.
Yep. That would definitely be the first time I did that.
Uh-huh. And at what
Not the
point
last time.
d- and this is something that always gets me, and it might be because I really don't like needles. If I ever go to the doctor and they draw my blood, I can't look at it.
Well, you
I
know what?
can't imagine.
When I get my blood drawn, I'm actually the same way because I'm not the one holding the needle.
Interesting.
There
Because
there is a difference when you're on the holding the needle because
I can't look at a needle going into my own vein. Just can't do it.
mm,
So
yeah, but at a certain point, you don't.
you don't care.
It's really easy just to get over it.
Got
It
it.
really is.
So what got you over it to that point? Because for me, and obviously this is why we have you on here. For me, the idea of, first of all, sticking a needle in my arm, and second of all, knowing what I know about heroin, how addictive it is, and how it can destroy your life, I can't see myself ever getting that far. At what point were you like, all right, I'm ready for the heroin?
Well, okay, so fast forward the age of 27, right? That was when I found my first steady connect for oxycodone, and
Mm-hmm.
even then, he would get his own prescription and he would sell off the extras, which he would run out of in after like a few days, and he would get his new prescription every 2 weeks, which basically meant I only would use opiates every other weekend. So still, I'm not physically addicted.
Sorry, let me interrupt you there really quick. That's a really interesting thing that you're pointing out the difference between physical addiction and the fact that you're still continuing to seek these things out.
Oh yeah, no, I was absolutely mentally addicted from the start. But it took a very long time to get physically addicted, and that
Uh-huh.
was only when I got into the heroin. So for 3 years, I had that same connect, and then I remember in April of 2013, his doctor was trying to get him off of opiates, so he was cutting down the dose, which meant he was no longer
A source.
he was no longer a viable connect. So now the thing is, the town that I live in is one town over from basically what is like practically the heroin capital of my state.
Got it.
So, and the way that
Hop, skip, and a jump to go shopping.
yeah, exactly. And even though I didn't really know any dealers there, it is kind of like an open market over there. So what I did in order to figure out where I could find heroin was I actually went on that city's police log, and I looked at all the arrests for Class A
Wow.
substances.
Wow.
I looked at the addresses, and I basically triangulated it to like this one central location. I went to that spot, and sure enough,
Jesus
found somebody
Christ.
to sell me
You're-
that stuff in like
You're
5
telling me
minutes.
that you use the police logs essentially as the yellow pages to find drug dealers.
Pretty much.
Wow. You can continue because I'm speechless.
Oh, you're gonna be speechless again. Not too,
Oh, okay.
shortly.
All right. I'll get myself ready.
The story about how I ended up using needles. Okay, so maybe about 5 months after I started buying heroin, and I was actually starting to have some episodes with dope sickness in which I'd be sweating it out for a few days and then
What's
I'd be
dope
okay
sickness?
again. Oh, my dope sickness was like I'd be getting these like backaches. I'd be feeling run down.
Oh,
I'd
that's
have,
just a
like,
withdrawal symptom.
yeah, withdrawal symptoms. Yeah.
Okay,
Dope sickness.
got it. I'm not hip to the terms.
You'll learn.
Okay, great. Sorry, continue.
So yeah, and I was like spending more and more money on more bags to get me high. I went from one bag to sniffing one bag to getting me high to sniffing like 4 of them.
And then what drug are we
And,
talking about at this point?
This was heroin.
So you're sniffing the heroin.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Because nowadays it is potent enough that sniffing it works.
Got it.
And but I mean, I kind of like sort of thought like oh well but if I injected it, it would probably be a lot less to use and to buy and blah blah blah. But it wasn't until I was I was on the streets looking to cop, and there were these people from the needle exchange program handing out free kits. And I took one of them.
I'm in the middle of
And
being
that's how I started
speechless.
Huh?
I'm in the middle of being speechless. That's why I said nothing.
Yeah, so these people that are actually trying to help with the harm reduction actually got me on the needle.
Wow. Okay. So, and what was this organization handing out needles?
They're called Tapestry Health.
And what are they? They're not a methadone clinic, or they just
No,
hand
they're
out
not a
needles and
methadone-
not drugs?
It's a no, they're not a methadone clinic. They don't do Suboxone or anything. They hand out like kits. They also do like STD and whatever testing. They hand out like condoms and stuff. And yeah, they got like a whole fishbowl of like condoms in their office. And they've also got I think now they also hand out naloxone, which is this drug that you use to reverse an overdose. See, in my state, you in my state they actually do. You're able to carry around this naloxone, which is like you squirt it up people's noses when they overdose, and it's supposed to like kill the effects of heroin. In fact, when I was at my first halfway house, there was a guy that overdosed, and it took actually the name of the drug is Narcan, and they had to Narcan him 4 times to bring him back.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, granted, I mean, yeah, and we actually keep Narcan at the house, and actually I'm an Uber driver, and I actually carried Narcan with me in my car because there is such a epidemic of opiate use that I figure it can't hurt to have some with me.
And not for you, it's for the passenger, right?
Right, for the passenger. You can't use it on yourself. I mean, if you're in that,
Oh, you're already
in that
blacked
kind of
out or
state,
whatever.
yeah, you're already helpless. You have to have someone else help you.
Got it. So let's freeze your story right there, because I want to get into what your life essentially turned into and how you got out of it. But I'd like to bring up, because you've pointed out a couple of things that kind of were accidental. For example, the doctor giving you the Vicodin when you probably didn't really need it. Your mom giving you that, I already forgot the name of that other damn drug, when you probably didn't really need Klonopin when you probably didn't really need it.
It's KLONOPIN.
Okay, I wrote it down. I won't forget it. I want to talk about responsibility because I mentioned this in my article, my Welcome to Tweakerville article, and I got a lot of response to that article. And a big part of the response was I wrote in the article that it's a choice to do the drugs, which is essentially saying people are responsible for the actions that they're taking, which are to do these drugs. And the backlash was, oh, no, it's a disease. These people can't help themselves. And your response to me after you read it was, that is the biggest thing you're not allowed to say. And didn't you even tell me people will get death threats for suggesting this?
Well, I mean, maybe I exaggerated about death threats or whatever, but people will get hot-headed about it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you might get death threats. I don't know. So
here's the question. Where were you responsible in this line of you becoming, you injecting heroin?
Well, I mean, I certainly could have said no thank you to the people that were handing out the injection kits. I mean, they hand out, these little like brown paper bags, like your mom packs you lunch in for school, and it comes with like a couple of syringes, a little cooker thing,
a little cooker thing. Wow. Sorry.
Cotton balls and saline solution. So, and also alcohol wipes so that, your arm doesn't get infected or whatever.
Right. Speechless again.
Like Neosporin.
Even going back further than that, let's talk to when the doctor gave you the first Vicodin. I mean, we already gone over that your upbringing probably made you more susceptible to this addiction.
Yes.
But so the doctor hands you the Vicodin. Your mom accidentally gives you this drug not knowing that you're already on Vicodin, and maybe she did or didn't know what the effects would have been.
Right.
At what point were you responsible, or at what point weren't you responsible?
See, that's the thing. I mean, I mean, it's like, I do hold myself responsible for, letting myself get carried away with that. I mean, I should have been thinking to myself, whoa, I like this stuff too much. I should, flush this down the toilet. I'm not even in pain. It was what was like helping me cope with the fact that it's a job, because I no longer had a car. And, now I was even more dependent on my parents, which I really resented. And I don't know. It's funny, when I took the oxycodone that my coworker gave me, after it was gone, I actually said, wow, that was an amazing experience. I should never do it again. But then the next time the opportunity rolled around, which was like several months later, I pounced on it.
You did it again. Yeah.
Yep. And maybe I thought that because these opportunities were only presenting themselves like every several months, that it was okay.
Uh-huh.
When it became more and more available, that was a problem.
So why do you think people get so hostile when someone like me writes an article suggesting that people are responsible for getting themselves into this position, and as we'll talk about more, getting themselves out of it?
Well, I mean, people have gone through their whole recovery, hearing the whole, it's a disease, you're powerless, blah, 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 blah. And then, you have some guy on the internet saying, like, totally the opposite. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people that I've seen, coming to smart recovery meetings that normally go to AA, they'll go to like one meeting, they'll listen politely, and then they'll go back to their meetings, mostly because the smart recovery people are very gentle about bringing up personal responsibility. So
you mentioned a lot of stuff there that's certainly not familiar to me, and probably not familiar to many of the people who will be listening to this. So you mentioned a 12-step recovery. And I
Yes.
remember I worked with a ex-heroin addict at one point in my life, and he told me about the 12-step recovery. He said the first thing that they taught him was that he is powerless over his addiction. And that's the same thing as saying you're not responsible for it because you can't control it. And now what you're saying is that when people go to these things, they often don't make it to step 2. So the only thing that they hear is you're powerless against your addiction. Do I have that right?
Well, that was what the book that I was reading earlier was suggesting, which is called The Small Book, A Revolutionary Alternative for Overcoming Alcohol and Drug Dependence. It's by a guy named Jack Trimpey. A little plug for that book. It's actually a really, really good book.
Would you recommend it to?
Yeah, to anybody that's like suffering from addiction, especially somebody that thinks that the 12 steps are garbage.
And are the 12 steps garbage? That's something I want to ask you as a person who has seen both sides of this coin.
Yeah, honestly, I'm really not a big fan. So let's go over these 12 steps right here. So
sure.
So like your friend said about the first thing that he learned was that 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 people are powerless. And yes, the first step goes like this. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol or drugs, that our lives had become unmanageable. If we're powerless and our lives are unmanageable, I guess what they're sort of trying to say is that we are powerless when it comes to drinking and drugs, that we just shouldn't do them at all because when we do, we just can't control ourselves.
Right. I mean, there's a level of powerlessness when you get so addicted. Like, if you're a total addict and it's sitting right in front of you, there's no choice that you're going to make that's going to be not do that. Right.
Yeah. So honestly, I actually don't have as much of an issue with step 1 as I do with the other steps. Because there is that point that, if you're an addict, then you do lose control when you're using, as opposed to like the average person that has a beer on a Friday or Saturday night and nothing more.
Before you get to those steps, can you read the paragraph that you read to me before the call? About step 1.
All right. So it says in the book, step 1 actually teaches addicts that they are not responsible for what they put in their mouths, that they have no capacity to refrain from ingesting alcohol. Could it be that alcoholism is largely a result of this idea? That is, isn't the alcoholic already acting out the idea that his desire for alcohol is an absolute need, that a craving is irresistible or intolerable, and that when the desire to drink occurs, it must be gratified immediately and completely? To the extent that this is so, the message in this first step could be counterproductive to those who are concerned enough to attend a few meetings, but not really inclined to adopt the social or theological elements of AA spiritualism. Learned helplessness from step 1 often can be a self-fulfilling prophecy in which the addict retains the central spiritual principle of surrender even after quitting AA. For example, after attending a few meetings, you may decide that AA isn't for you, that you can get sober on your own. So you stop attending meetings, resolve to quit drinking. However, something lingers in your thinking and it won't go away. When you feel like having a drink, you think back to what was said at the AA meetings and you remember the sincere people and their stern warnings. You are powerless over alcohol and you have no control. Only a higher power can restore you to sanity. Incidentally, higher power is capitalized. We all tried it on our own, and none of us could remain sober until we found our higher power. You can't resist the overpowering urge to drink, and if you leave this group, you will drink again, then it's all downhill. This group is a lifeboat. Leave us and you'll sink. There's no escape except through our loving God who gives us the strength to stay sober one day at a time. This kind of indoctrination does nothing to help you resolve not to drink. It is probably the worst thing to tell someone who is having problems with impulse control and who does not believe in a rescuing deity. If you are seriously tempted to have a drink and all those experienced people say you're powerless over alcohol, who are you to argue the point? Down the hatch. Cheers. Your decline is highly predictable.
Wow. And of course, we can replace alcohol with any drug.
Oh, yeah.
Drug that you want for that passage.
Compulsive shopping, even.
Now, I have a huge problem with that first step, and you're saying that your biggest problems are with the later steps?
Yep. So, step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, which is basically, you just...
Belief in God.
Yeah, exactly.
A requirement of the belief of God to save you.
Or believe in some kind of... or God of their understanding is what they always emphasize, to sort of like not scare people away from the God thing.
Uh-huh.
Not God. God of your understanding, they say.
Which is like, if you're gonna commit to God, at least commit to it. Don't give this wishy whatever.
Well,
Go ahead.
It's basically like a big bait and switch, and you're gonna kind of realize that as you get further into the
I'll quit interrupting. Go ahead.
But no, it's fine. So step 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Like I said, as we understood him. Okay, whatever. But now we're surrendering. We're surrendering our will to, someone else instead of like taking matters into our own hands.
Well, and then I guess I am going to interrupt. When you say the God of our own understanding, philosophically, what that's doing is it's saying anything that you want to make up is cool with us.
Pretty much, and that's why people will say it can be a doorknob if you want.
Which is ridiculous.
People are apparently praying to doorknobs.
Well, and then if it's you can make up whatever you want. Well, and I mean, I understand this is I understand this is a silly example, but if I want to make up a god that encourages me to drink, I can do it by these instructions.
I never thought of it that way, but
I mean, there's nothing here so far that I've seen that says stop drinking, but we're only on step 3. Please continue.
Right. I mean, there's it gets more detailed and everything. Like, so step 4 is where like the hard work begins, because at first all you're doing is acknowledging powerlessness, coming to believe in a God, and then surrendering your will over to it. But then step 4, that's where you're getting out like the notebook and the pencils and stuff, because you're doing like the actual work here, which is step 4. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Yeah, basically, AA goes on and on about how this is a disease. It's not a moral failing. Yet we're taking a inventory of our moral failures.
Right. So it's like, hey, you're not that bad for drinking alcohol, but write down all the reasons that you're bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's something that hasn't really made much sense to me. I mean, granted,
well, I mean, the reason it doesn't make any sense is because it's openly contradictory, right?
Yeah. No, it wasn't until I started like reading this book that it kind of like slapped me in the face that, yeah, this is like a complete contradiction.
Okay, well, what about step 5?
So step 5, we admitted to God and to ourselves and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So it's confession. I mean,
how are you supposed to know what the exact nature of your wrongs are?
By doing that fearless moral inventory.
Okay, so again, I'm seeing here the road to solipsism, if we're going to speak about this philosophically, where when we're cataloging our moral defects, and then in step 5 we say, okay, tell exactly what they are. Well, how do you know exactly what they are? And at that point, it's just your opinion to describe what exactly your moral defects are, right?
I guess you just go with what the worst stuff is about you.
According to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so, that's basically the mea culpa step, And like I said, it is kind of like confession, except instead of confessing to a priest, you're confessing to your sponsor, because that's the other human being that's mentioned in that step. That's the thing. So when you go into Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous, any of the 12-step programs, you are encouraged to, if not required, to find a sponsor. Now, a sponsor is basically just somebody who has, a certain amount of like clean time. I forget what the exact minimum was, but that's all the requirement. That's really all the only requirement, and to have like worked the steps. But there's no other like special training required to become a sponsor.
Right.
So you hear stories about, people whose own sponsors have like relapsed.
Yeah. So, and I guess we'll just keep getting back to these steps because there's so much to unpack from each one, which is you mentioned to me earlier that throughout the process of recovery, you're encouraged to spend time around recovering addicts, right?
Well, yeah, it's like supposed to be like this, kind of safe community where all the, where everybody can like be together and like encourage each other to stay clean and everything.
But that's the opposite of a safe community. It's a really dangerous community.
They encourage you to relapse too.
Right. And then when I've taken business and real estate classes and wealth classes, and one of the first things that they teach you is don't hang around broke people if you ever want to get wealthy. You got to make new friends who are in the position that you want to be. And so it would make sense if you're a recovering addict, you want to hang around people who've never been addicted at all, or people that are completely recovered.
Yes, and I think that this is also where the the disease thing comes into play, because when people are hanging around, when recovering addicts are hanging around with people who have never been addicted, they might encounter a bit of ignorance on these people's parts, where they might just say, well, why don't you just stop using?
Right.
And that always infuriates a recovering addict, because obviously it is not that simple.
Of course.
And that's why people want to, that's probably another reason why people want to associate with other, obviously ones who are doing well in their recovery. I mean,
but even then, wouldn't it make sense to, instead of with recovering, completely recovered addicts? So you could both have the role model to look toward. The recovering addict understands you. They're not just going to be like, why don't you just stop? I would just stop. What's your problem? And at the same time, it's not like they're about to relapse because they've recovered. They're done.
Well, there's the rub in the like substance abuse rehab community, so to speak. There is no such thing as a recovered addict, because
you're powerless against your addiction, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably that's likely a factor. I mean, the idea is that something you're going to struggle with for like the rest of your life. And then you have to be vigilant for the rest of your life. Whereas like in other schools of recovery, like smart recovery, rational recovery, they, some people will actually say recovered addicts or ex-addicts. That's kind of like the fundamental difference between, the 12 steps and alternative methods for recovery.
Well, and then it even begs the question, if you're permanently an addict and you have no power over it, then what's the treatment supposed to be doing? What's the purpose of the treatment if you can't do anything about it and then you can't actually be recovered?
Yep. That is a good question. I mean, obviously, we embark on the treatment because we want to be better. But I guess if you think about it too much, you kind of encounter that problem.
Well, we're encountering that. We're only even on step 5. We're encountering that problem every step of the way.
Oh yeah.
And this is really starting to make sense to me now. I got this huge response about how it's a disease, and you shouldn't tell these people that they're responsible for their actions. And every single aspect of this, and I'm assuming that this is the standard that you're going to see if you go to any given recovery clinic or whatever group or whatever, is this bombardment of philosophical concepts that are contradictory to you recovering.
Yeah.
Am I painting an accurate picture here?
I'd say so. I mean, everything about these meetings just has rubbed me the wrong way. Like I've mentioned, call and response, and just this kind of ritualistic approach to all the meetings. Right.
Tell us about the ritual.
So, people will read this like preamble before the meetings actually start. And there are like certain like passages where like the entire group will like join in, in reciting whatever the facilitator or whatever is reciting, is reading off the preamble. And this happens like several times throughout the meeting. And then they close by like standing up, getting into a circle, holding hands, and reciting either the Serenity Prayer or the Lord's Prayer.
So
but once again, this is not a religious thing, even though they're reciting a very religious prayer.
Right. And it's not like, I mean, I guess obviously the Lord's Prayer is very religious, but everything else, there's nothing inherently religious about it. But it's mimicking religion almost exactly. Am I right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So can you give an example of one of these call-in responses?
Well, for example, in Narcotics Anonymous, there is this part where they recite, thinking of alcohol as different from drugs has caused many an addict to relapse. Make no mistake. And then everybody joins in and says, alcohol is a drug.
Right. Which you gave it. I have no experience being Catholic. You brought up the Catholic Church. That's something very similar that you would do in church, right?
Yeah, where the priest goes like, Lord have mercy. And the entire congregation goes, Lord have mercy. And the priest goes, Christ have mercy. Congregation goes, Christ has mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Or the preacher says, we pray to the Lord. Congregation goes, Lord, hear our prayer.
All right, so what's step 6?
Step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what that means. Particularly because, I mean, I'm not even going to attack people for being religious. We've already defined God as whatever you want it to be. Yep. In step whatever it was before this. So if God is the only thing that could take away addiction, and you could just make up whatever that is, that's just another reinforcement that you are incapable of taking care of your own addiction.
Yeah. Then we go to step 7, which kind of almost seems like it's kind of repeating step 6, because it says we humbly asked him to remove these shortcomings. So first, we're ready to have him remove the defects of character, and then step 7 is where we actually ask him.
Well, maybe they had to add an extra one to make sure it was 12 steps.
Maybe. I don't know.
So what's step 8?
This is where people talk about making amends. So we made a list of all the persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Which brings us to step 9. We made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
And how does this actually play out in the real world? Because, I mean, to me, hearing that sounds like a legitimate thing to do. And if it is, then that's the first legitimate thing that we've seen in this 12-step process.
Yeah, I mean, as long as like it says, if it unless it causes more harm than good, because you know we screw over a lot of people in our addiction, and there might be a great many people who would just as soon never want to hear from us again, and for us to try to make amends might actually be rubbing salt in the wounds.
Uh-huh.
So I mean that's a kind of a scary step, because you never know what kind of like can of worms that could open up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then what's your criticism of it? If I mean, other than it's scary, and I'm assuming that the book you're reading has got a pretty good criticism of it as well, right?
Yeah, actually, and it's a kind of a short criticism too. So it says Freud and others have written about the common defense mechanism undoing, where guilt-flooded persons seek to compensate for earlier misdeeds by symbolically or actually acting out scenarios that absolve the offense. To the extent that steps 8 and 9 are to absolve persistent guilt about past alcoholic sins, wouldn't making amends to oneself be more appropriate than dwelling on past mistakes and possibly opening old wounds? Aren't most people happy just to be rid of who were once obnoxious drunks? Is it really constructive to exhume the past this way? Do recipients of amends often appreciate surprises like this? Isn't the greatest gift of a substance abuser to society the mere fact of his or her sobriety? Aren't steps 8 and 9 melodramatic and cloying? Are they really relevant to recovery from chemical dependency? Are steps 8 and 9 intended to help others, or are they part of a ritual for conditional self-esteem?
You know what that ritual suddenly reminds me of?
What's that?
The Eucharist.
Oh, the
So
body and blood of Christ?
yeah, so we just confessed, and now we could be redeemed of our sins if we go make it up to other people. And as you've pointed out, this completely misses the whole point. Is that it's you, the drunk slash drug user, that needs to be amended, not everybody else.
Yeah. I've mentioned, all the stuff that I do to try to like fill the void that drugs have left behind. But the stuff that I do, mostly all the hobbies that I've done, that I've, partaken in, playing the guitar, playing the bass, learning programming, studying Japanese, I mean, I feel like that's kind of like, that kind of self-improvement is like the best way to make amends to oneself.
Let's talk about that, because I wanted to bring that up. So we've done a fair bit of criticism on this 12-step recovery.
Yes.
But what you're telling me is that the best thing that it's been for you is you saying, I'm going to improve myself with whatever.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that when I was at these rehab facilities, with no musical instruments, with no computer. I mean, I did have books, although I wasn't really up for reading them until like a couple weeks after I'd finally, ultimately detoxed.
Right. It's hard to focus on something to read when all you can think about is getting a hit, right?
Well, I mean, at that point, I did not want to hit. I just wanted the sickness to go away. So I just wanted to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very hard to do when you have restless arms and legs, which is like the bitchiest symptom of opiate withdrawal.
Right.
Because it keeps you from sleeping. It's worse than the nausea or diarrhea or achiness or sweating. That's the one thing that keeps you from falling asleep.
Man, I haven't even heard of that one. That sounds awful.
It's the worst. I mean, talk to anybody that was ever addicted to opiates, that ex-junkie guy that you knew, he'll probably tell you the same thing, that yeah, it's bad. The problem was when you go to, at least the detox that I went to, they don't give you enough time to really get that stuff out of your system. By the time you move on to the next phase of rehab, you're still pretty sick. I mean, there was still a lot.
Let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
Sorry, I'd like to slow that down because I think this is a very important point.
Sure.
So the first step, let's say I'm a full-blown heroin addict and I'm like, I want to stop this. The first step is to get me into detox, detox, correct?
Yes.
And then what you're saying is they don't give you enough time in detox to actually detox.
Right. And, that's even when you get into detox, because it can actually take up to a few days to get in there, because, beds fill up so quickly, but there is like a lot of changeover. So they have you calling like every few hours because, that's how much difference, it could make, a few hours.
Like there's a bed right now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody could be like packing up and leaving right now, and the first person that, calls the receptionist is the one that's going to get that bed. So it's all a matter of timing.
It seems to me, if someone hits the peak of saying, or I should say the trough of saying, I am done with this, I am ready to go right now and stop. We actually want that person to stop, you need to capitalize on that emotion instantly and get them out of it, right?
Exactly. I mean, that 4 hours could be the difference between, being completely resolved to stop and then,
get your next hit.
Saying, fuck it, I'm going to go get another hit. And that could be the last one.
Mm-hmm. And so then after detox, you get moved into what now?
Well, this is my experience in the rehab that I've gone to, which was a state-funded rehab. And where I live, the way it works is you go from detox to another facility called Clinical Stabilization Services, or CSS for short. And that's basically the meat and potatoes of rehab right there. That's where you're going to like all these nonstop groups and everything. And, supposedly learning how to like cope with life without drugs.
This is where the 12 steps start.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes
if you're getting the 12 steps.
Yeah, I mean, but sometimes they'll inject stuff from other types of recovery, like smart recovery. There was actually one time where, this one counselor brought in a worksheet that was actually from smart recovery, and I nearly fell over, in shock. But even then, she was actually kind of like apologetic about it. Like, I know that this is smart recovery, but what? This is awesome.
So we haven't talked about smart recovery yet. Let's get there in a second. I wanted to, you mentioned this before the call, that because you spend so little time in detox, and because you're spending all day in these meetings, that all you want to do is go to sleep.
Yeah. So many people will like be sitting in their chairs huddled in blankets because, they're still having hot and cold flashes.
And if I'm going to tie this together with what you said before, which is that you took it upon yourself that like, okay, I'm going to improve myself. I'm going to learn an instrument or learn a new language or whatever. Yeah. Wouldn't it make sense once you've detoxed the person, it's not so much of getting them to understand something as it is like getting them to focus on something else, like do this instead of doing drugs.
Exactly. I'm reminded from this scene in Trainspotting Part 2, where, the main character is trying to get his friend off of drugs. And he basically says to him, okay, you're an addict, so be addicted. Just be addicted to something else. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was exercise he was talking about. He was trying to get his friend to go for a run on the mountains with him. So yeah, exactly. Focus on something new. Or like another saying goes, nature abhors a vacuum. You got to fill that vacuum with something else.
Right. And even if you were fully detoxed, but you're not, because they don't give you enough time, right. They subject you to these meetings. You're supposed to be writing stuff down, doing this call and response. You're being told the entire time that you don't have control over your addiction.
Well, let me just reiterate, though, that, okay, let me just clarify that the AA meetings, typically those are like just one group at the end of the day. You know, we're not doing like the AA format per se during like the whole day. We're not doing the whole alcohol as a drug chant or whatever. I mean, there's like a lot of there actually is a lot of like cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that are employed in certain groups. You know, it's kind of like a mishmash of different recovery schools. I mean, there have even been some groups where we've done like guided meditation, which is actually a staple of refuge recovery, which I can tell you about later.
Was it your experience, and I guess I'm just trying to summarize stuff too quickly when I'm saying this, but the way it seemed painted to me was that you're not given enough time really to get the stuff out of your system, and they throw you in this regimented thing where you kind of have to pay attention to this stuff all day, where you're like, I haven't even gotten over needing to sleep yet.
Yeah, and the thing is, people, I guess the staff also understands that these people are not quite finished detoxing, so they're not like particularly hard on people for, you know, not paying attention, so long as they're not disrupting the group. But still, it's kind of like they're wasting their time as a result.
Right. Well, and then when you have this huge difficult step, like, you know, I go into detox, I come out, and then I got to sit in this thing. I'm super uncomfortable. They're expecting me to pay attention. I'm having hot and cold flashes. I just wanted to go to bed. What are the likelihood that I just say, fuck it, and I go back to being a junkie?
It happens a lot. I mean, people do leave against medical advice a lot of times. Or other times that, you know, that kind of frustration manifests in other ways. Like there were a couple times where, you know, people would almost get into fistfights with one another.
Then after that step, what are some of the other difficulties once you're more detoxed and you're kind of in it for the longer haul? What are some of the other difficulties that people generally run into?
Honestly, it can be kind of monotonous. There have been times where the lessons in groups would actually repeat themselves. Because, you know, since these programs last from about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on like your insurance and also your living situation, I feel it almost seems like these counselors and social workers that work there only have maybe about up to 2 weeks worth of fresh material before it starts to repeat itself. Sometimes it's good to review things, but other times it's like, I just heard this before, like last week. What the hell?
And you also mentioned there's a complaint of infantilization.
Yeah, you know, I mean, the fact that our schedules are like very heavily monitored, you know, they wake us up at like 6:30, you know, they just like swing the doors open, you know, turn the lights on. Good morning, ladies.
Sounds awful.
Yeah, no, seriously, these people will speak with like the shrillest voices ever. It's awful. You know, I can laugh about it now, but oh God, I was really pissed off at the time, you know, especially since normally I do not wake up at 6:30 in the morning. I mean,
yeah, especially for a junkie, like, that's pretty rough.
Even, you know, even while not using, I'm kind of, I have a very second shift lifestyle. You know, so I go to bed after midnight and I get up maybe around like 8 or 9.
Sure.
Know, thankfully, my work schedule allows for it.
And then what else are some complaints that you would have from the infantilization treatment?
I mean, I understand that when people are still detoxing, you know, still coming off of drugs, still trying to get used to life without them, you know, they're going to be kind of grumpy. So it almost seems like staff is sort of trained almost to sort of like brush off complaints, even if they're legitimate. You know, it's almost like this big boy who cried wolf syndrome. You know, except they're kind of like attributing it to the clients in general and not on a case-by-case basis.
They're not looking at people individually.
Exactly. Like, for example, I mean, sometimes there might be issues with medication. Like, there might be a lot of times when people go from detox to CSS, their medications might be delayed in arriving. Whether it's an issue with the pharmacy or just an issue with somebody forgot to collect them, kind of thing. And sometimes people they need those medications, and it's like they've already lost control of so many aspects of their life, and now they can't even get their medications when they need it. It's like that can often be like the last straw for a lot of clients. And they will have like a total meltdown over it. Like, I actually drew a comic book that kind of like lampooned the whole rehab process, and one of them involves like this guy like on the floor, thrashing his arms and legs, screaming about his meds. I make it out to be all funny and everything, but the fact is, it's
it's a real thing.
Yeah, it's completely true. It's like Carrie Fisher said, if my life wasn't funny, it would just be true, and that is unacceptable. Well, it is true, and it is unacceptable.
Well, and then I'd like to segue that into methadone clinics, because particularly when you said that you got handed out that bag of syringes kind of like it was Easter at a free giveaway, as I've discovered, in order to get methadone in a lot of these methadone clinics, particularly what's happening here in Washington and particularly Everett, I posted a picture of a mountain of needles that from one camp that was cleaned up. That in order to get methadone, you simply have to walk into the clinic and say, "I'm an addict." Is this true?
It is, because actually, before I ended up going into rehab this last time, I was actually trying to get methadone at a clinic, just so that I would not be, sick anymore, not have to, because at that point, I just did not want to go back into rehab, because I'd already had an unpleasant experience with it the first time around. But
that speaks volumes by itself.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, it does still take time. I mean, they put me they took all like my information and everything, asked me a bunch of questions about my drug use and all that. They did like a swab of my mouth. They did like tests to see if I had any like diseases or whatever. But basically, it sounded like I was, going to be approved to be on the methadone program. But in the end, I ultimately did end up checking into rehab before that could happen.
It's good to hear. Because
I honestly believe that methadone is good for like stepping down, like, over the course of several days. It did make detox, less horrible than it could have been. Because going cold turkey is an absolute nightmare. I could never make it more than 2 days.
Wow.
But so methadone does serve a purpose, I totally believe. And same thing with Suboxone. But I just don't think that Suboxone and methadone are things that people should be on for years and years. And the thing was, I was on Suboxone for 3 years. I was with a Suboxone clinic. And there were so many ways to cheat.
Tell me about
that program. Well, okay, so with Suboxone, it's not like methadone where you come in every single day. You come in like once a week, once every 2 weeks if you've been, well behaved enough on the program. And they gave you a script for, 7 to 14 days worth of Suboxone. Now, you come in and they give you a urine test to make sure that you've been clean. But here's the thing.
Clean from Suboxone or clean from everything else?
Clean from heroin.
But heroin's out of your system in like hours, isn't it?
No, actually, heroin stays in your system for about 4 to 6 days.
Okay. All right.
Which means, let's say, you come in on Monday, to get your Suboxone. They give you the urine test, comes back negative for the heroin. Well, great. So they handed you your prescription for Suboxone. You go on your merry way. And now you can get high on heroin that day because by next Monday, it will be out of your system as long as you don't use again after that day.
So I could use the heroin, coast on the Suboxone, get some more Suboxone, use the heroin, coast on the Suboxone, repeat.
Exactly. You could have like a nice little orderly schedule where you use heroin, once, maybe twice a week and get away with it.
And
because they won't know.
All right. So my math is coming out. Are you telling me that entire situation could be avoided if they simply tested inside the time it takes heroin to get out of your system?
Yeah, they had you just come in like
Twice a week instead of once a week
for the testing. Then yeah, but they only do that to people that keep like violating the urine test.
Okay.
When it would actually make more sense
I
to do
am
it to everybody.
tripping balls over what you just told me. The solution is that simple. I mean, I understand this doesn't solve everything, but in terms of just handing out free drugs, Suboxone specifically, and keeping them on it forever and anon, while claiming for it to be treatment, it could largely be solved just by having them come in twice a week instead of once.
Well, I mean, as far as people cheating on it, then yeah, it could be stopped by having people come in more often. And so that's the thing, is that it's very easy. I mean, it can enable people to continue using.
What? And it's almost like asking for an invitation. If it's 4 to 6 days, that means 1 week is like 1 day after it's out of your system.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so that's what I used to do for like 3 years. Was I would use once a week.
Okay.
So it was the one time that I had control over my habits. But even that kind of, went to shit eventually, and I ended up getting thrown off the Suboxone program.
How long did it take for you to get thrown off?
It took about 2 years.
2 years.
I got thrown off of the first one. Got thrown off of the first one.
Oh, and then there was a second one.
There was a second one that I continued to do up until I checked into rehab for the first time back in September of 2016.
Okay, I'm afraid to ask my next question. So how are people taking advantage of the methadone?
So the thing is, if you take, this is where the benzodiazepines thing comes into play again. Like I said, if you take a benzodiazepine with an opiate, it amplifies the effects. And from what I've heard, I have not experienced this personally, but I've heard it said many times that if you take a benzodiazepine like Valium, Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan with methadone, it's apparently no different than being back on heroin as far as the effect goes. I guess it seems like people do keep getting chance after chance after chance. How often they do urine tests when people go to the methadone clinic. I mean, like I said, I never ended up on the methadone program, so
got it. So I
don't have any firsthand experience, so there's not as much. Right. I mean, my experience was with Suboxone.
Got it. Well, we have to observe that there's some other similar cheat that's occurring with methadone because people are also staying on it for years and years. Am I right?
Yeah. Another thing is that I think a lot of people will also say, "Oh no, I need a higher dose," so they end up getting prescribed much higher doses than they need. And one of the things that I've seen.
Sorry, wait. You're leaving me in the dust again.
Sorry.
So you're saying that if I want more methadone, all I have to say is I want more methadone. Like, the amount that you gave me last time wasn't enough. You need to give me more than that.
Yep. I mean, there really is no medical way to test whether, people are in withdrawal aside from, taking their word for it.
Unreal.
I mean, maybe one day they'll have some kind of machine that can, monitor people's brain waves or whatever. But until then, All we have is people's word.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like the methadone or even the Suboxone should only be allowed once you're in detox.
I agree.
Once someone can look and be like, okay, this person has had it for 2 days, or 3, or however long it is, it's time to start taking them off it.
Right, stepping down. And that is exactly how it works when you're in detox. In fact, there were a couple times where I actually detoxed myself with some leftover Suboxone strips. Although
because you knew how to do it.
Yeah, but I ended up relapsing because, I just didn't have a plan. For, afterwards. So that's what happened. But, other people have done that too. They've, I've gone to I've gone to Reddit groups where people talk about, at-home detoxes, and all the stuff that they've, used to keep themselves comfortable. Or sometimes people will detox with this thing called kratom, which is some kind of tea that has opioid properties in it, which apparently states are trying to outlaw, which is
what's the name
ridiculous.
Of that drug?
Kratom. It's
spell it.
Kratom.
Okay.
And they did the same thing with this drug called ibogaine.
A lot of that was cutting out for me. I don't know how much came through. Can you repeat the whole thing about that drug?
Oh, about ibogaine.
Yes.
So yeah, it's this. It's actually this hallucinogen, but if you take it, it can actually purge your system of of opiates, and it causes kind of a relatively painless detox.
And it's effective.
It's effective, and people will go down to Mexico to get the treatment because it's illegal up here in the United States. But I actually know a guy who did that treatment, and he said it was amazing.
So you can have the Suboxone, you can have the methadone, but you can't have the effective treatment.
Right.
Is that the message I'm getting? Okay.
Yeah, it really does seem that way because, the two medications that you can be on for years and years, and then there's the one that one day and it's over.
Let's get back to the 12 steps. We only got 3 of them left, and I don't want to let everyone die in curiosity what the last 3 were. So what's step 10?
Yes. Okay, let me grab that book again. So, step 10. We continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it.
Okay, so that's just a repeat of the previous steps, right?
Yeah, kind of. And the book points out, here we find out that AA is forever. The program is interminable. Members continue and continue and continue year after year, decade after decade, to take searching and fearless moral inventory and promptly admit when they are wrong.
So it just sounds like busy work to make sure you never recover.
Well, their idea is that it keeps you from, engaging in the kind of behaviors that led you to use in the first place. But yeah, that's just kind of keeps you, to keep coming back, as they say. That's one of their slogans, keep coming back.
Keep coming back.
Wow.
Isn't that what your drug dealer says? Keep coming back.
Well, that's what they hope.
Yeah. What about step 11?
Okay, so step 11, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will and the power to carry that out.
Oh my God. So praying for the power of the will of the God that you made up out of nowhere.
What's that?
You're praying for God that you created to realize his will.
Well, this is where the whole use a doorknob example kind of falls flat.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, you're going to have to, at a certain point, it's God.
Yeah.
No other way around it.
Which, I mean, we could come up with the criticism of what if God is a good or bad idea to bring into this, but at least with God, there's some objective attributes that I can attribute to him. You know, if we're going to base this off the Bible, where it's like, okay, God has these attributes and he's going to do this and he's going to do that. It's not whatever you think he is and whatever you think he's going to do. So they've given the person the power to create whatever figment of the imagination that they want. It's not even somebody else's figment of imagination. Like, whatever you want can be a doorknob, and then we're going to help you realize the will of that doorknob. And so the will of that doorknob has more choice than the person does. Like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, doorknob has more will than a person. That is bad. That is very bad.
Okay, so step 12. Hit me. I'm ready.
Step 12.
I'm not actually ready, but hit me anyway.
Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, with message and principles in all our affairs. So basically, pay it forward.
Say that again. It cut out a little bit again for me. So having had the spiritual awakening, what?
As a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
So rinse, lather, repeat.
Exactly. And, that's where people are encouraged to, become sponsors or to start their own meetings and, basically just, keep this thing going.
You were right at the beginning of how much more often that I would be speechless. I like a lot of the things that you broke down because I think it gives people a chance to see where some of the issues are, because I had one response to my Welcome to Tweakerville article, which was that I'm not showing any compassion, which is funny because I specifically wrote in the article, I said, hey, I know I sound like a hard ass when I'm talking like this, but it actually comes from a place of compassion because I don't think it's compassionate to continue to give somebody their drug. And one of the responses I got was, you even said in your article that someone shouldn't be compassionate. I'm like, what the? Did you even read the fucking thing? But there is this confusion over where exactly is the compassion, because methadone and Suboxone, I mean, even though they're dwarfed by other drugs that are illegal for the effectiveness, they do serve a purpose in getting a person detoxed, but they have to be used in a certain way, and that certain way is not being done.
There's actually a third drug, which I think is actually a much more effective drug because it doesn't have any opioid properties in it. What it is it's a complete blocker. It actually keeps you from getting high.
Got it. It blocks the receptor sites.
Yes, and it lasts for an entire month. It's called Vivitrol, and I've actually taken it.
Spell it.
And Vivitrol.
Very good. So you've taken it?
Yeah, I've they inject it into you, and it lasts for a month, and it completely blocks you from getting high on not just on opiates but even alcohol.
Wow.
So now I've never tried to use drugs while I was on it. It just knowing that it's in me, for me, is enough. But the fact that it I think it's good because for people it might kind of force them to develop whatever coping skills they need to,
because they can't get their hit even if they get it.
Exactly. And in a month, a lot of times when you get that that first month of sobriety, you are a lot more likely to stay sober even longer because you've got that month. That's that's like an accomplishment for people.
Yeah, well, if you're going crazy in 2 days, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's it's almost like tough love, so to speak. It kind of forces you to, but I I think it's great, especially because it's not going to like have any kind of psychoactive effect the way that you know, methadone or even Suboxone to a certain degree. I mean, Suboxone did kind of like fog my mind a little bit, but I see people, when I see people on methadone, they'll be nodding out the same way that people nod out when they're, on dope.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I
granted,
mean, it's pretty close.
Some of that might be because
dope,
they're overprescribed, right? Or they're abusing it or whatever. But I mean, like I said, I still have not had any personal experience with that aside from detox.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the program I'm in right now actually does not accept people that are on methadone.
Well, there you go. So we've been going a while, and I want to kind of wrap it up. I think it's asking a lot of people to listen for so long, but I do want to get your opinion on two things. And the first one is, we did a lot of criticizing of the 12-step method. We had your criticism plus my artistic manifestations of my criticism. And if you're a junkie or if you're a tweaker and you want to recover, where should you go if the 12-step isn't really that great of a thing?
I go to two different meetings, actually. There's SMART Recovery. SMART is an acronym that stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training. And it basically just utilizes cognitive behavioral therapy and rational emotive behavioral therapy. It's basically just about learning techniques to sort of like change your thinking, to kind of like reflect on what might have even led you up to get into the mess you got into with drugs or alcohol in the first place. And it's strictly scientific, strictly secular.
And strictly secular sounds very important compared to what we just learned from the 12 steps.
Yep.
And in your opinion, it's effective?
Oh yeah. I mean, I enjoy it. It's, I enjoy the meeting that I go to every week. And I've been going there for actually the past 6 years on and off, but now I go there a lot more often, and I'm actually planning on becoming a SMART recovery facilitator myself. And my plan is actually to, once I get certified, I'm going to go to all the, I'm going to try to go to all those rehab facilities and conduct meetings over there the same way that the AA people will do the same thing. And I've even got awesome. I've got a chance to do one at the transitional house that I was in after I was done with the CSS. One of the staff members there, I've kept in contact with her, and I told her about my plans, and she says, as soon as I'm certified, come over there and we'll do it.
Cool.
So, and I'm hoping that can lead to opportunities to do that at other rehab places, other detoxes, other CSSs, other transitional houses. There's even a program for incarcerated people. Maybe I could do stuff over there too. They actually bring some people from that program for incarcerated people over to the SMART recovery meeting, which I think is very cool. And there's another meeting called
I was going to say, recovery. What's the second one? Sorry.
It's called Refuge Recovery, and it's actually Buddhist based, but it's not really, it's almost like secular Buddhism. It's not like, there's any there's not really much spirituality involved in it. You start off with like a 20-minute guided meditation, which really does relax you. And then you basically just go around and kind of share your thoughts, really. The same way that people do in 12-step meetings, but people
more
don't
effective.
Say, I'm Bob and I'm an alcoholic. They just say, I'm Bob.
Right. Yeah.
People don't identify as alcoholics. Same thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. You have to identify as the alcoholic. I thought we're trying to do the opposite.
Right. So that's why that's kind of the good thing about Smart and Refuge Recovery is that you don't do that there. You just introduce yourself and that's it.
And
Because
that's effective as well, in your opinion.
right,
The whole
because
recovery.
they don't. The whole thing is that they don't believe in identifying by your affliction.
Yeah. Which again
You know?
totally makes sense if you're going to identify by your affliction, and then I guess you're afflicted.
Yeah,
So that's the end of
powerless.
it. Powerless. God's a doorknob.
Yeah,
I guess we're getting better, but we can't. Hooray. Um,
exactly.
so the last thing I'd like to ask you is, in your opinion, what is the most important thing people should know for dealing with the tweaker problem? And by tweaker problem, I mean that this epidemic that's occurring where, like, we have measurable parts of the population being full-blown addicts, and we're having like full tent cities. What's the
So
most important thing that needs to be addressed if we ever want to not have this anymore?
uh, that's actually a very hard question to answer because I mean, addiction, it's like the result of like this perfect storm of like so many mitigating factors. I mean, I do believe that there is a certain predisposition that some people have towards becoming an addict. That's why, you know, two siblings, can both grow up in a hellish household. One of them becomes an addict. The other one actually pulls himself up by the bootstraps and leads a wonderful life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, my experience with rehab was, through state-funded institutions, and like I've stated, I wasn't really impressed with the way things were run, and probably just gonna sound like some crazy alt-right nut, but the government really needs to butt the hell out of our recovery.
Well, what if they just butted the hell out of keeping you addicted in the first place from this information you're giving me?
Yeah, I mean, it just all together, really, because I mean, it's because they're sticking their hand in our recovery that we're staying addicted. I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thanks again, JP, for coming on. That was some really powerful information, and I think a lot of people, both on the side of either being addicted or having someone addicted in your life, and someone who simply doesn't understand or doesn't have anyone like that in their lives, can take some information home and have an idea of, okay, how can I start thinking about this properly so me or somebody near me can help contribute to dealing with this problem. So I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to talk about your experience and what you've learned.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on and listening.
Okay.
It was a great experience.
All right. Well, I'd be happy to have you on again in the future to talk about more tweaker related stuff.
Absolutely.